I don't know whether any of you have had a chance to read the little article that we put together for you about Bitcoin, which you can download from the festival website, which may explain a little bit more about the relevance of the gentleman who is about to come to our stage. The gentleman used to be the head of foreign exchange for Visa, so knows a thing or two about transactions and trading, but is now devoting his life to challenging the status quo of currency. And in a way, what Bitcoin and the Bitcoin Foundation stand for is very similar to what Mona El-Tawawi stands for, who's going to be speaking afterwards. And that is the challenge to authority, the desire for direct communication between people in power and citizenship. Can you have a currency that's not backed by a government? Can you have a credit card that's not backed by a corporation? What if the Bitcoin really succeeds and people are anonymous again and we don't have club card data, credit card data that we can trade as advertising professionals? Is that world possible? What does Bitcoin tell us about the changing nature of culture and society? Will Bitcoin succeed? Let's find out with Jon Matonis, the Executive Director of the Bitcoin Foundation, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Good morning. Bitcoin has a fabulous story to tell. It's not about the fact that it's only 5 years old. It's not about the fact that it's a limited supply of 21 million, that, by the way, is subdividable into 8 decimal spaces. It's not about the fact that you can send money in any amount to any other person around the world without respect to national borders. Bitcoin is it's a personal story. And for me especially, it's been a very personal story. It has literally changed my life. I am 100% involved in Bitcoin now in terms of my career. I live it, I work it, I dream it, and I sleep it. And I really look forward to sharing that with you and sharing the Bitcoin story to show you how it will change your life as well. So what does a giant stone have to do with an electronic currency? It seems like these two things really shouldn't be together on the same stage in the same presentation. Well, it turns out that they actually have a lot in common. The giant stone money of Yap that you see here is from the islands in the Pacific. And it happens to have a lot of things in common with Bitcoin, because what they were used for was they created an oral history. The island tribes would use these stones that were quarried from an island several kilometers away, and they would bring these to the islands of Yap, and they would represent tribal wealth. The oral history was passed on to other people in the tribes, and they used to move them with long poles, and that's why they have those holes in the center like that. But the interesting thing is after a while, they just could stay there, and they didn't have to move them. The oral history was passed on after certain people would have died. It still represented wealth. And sometimes they would carve them in two for shared wealth. In fact, one time they were taking them across the sea in a canoe on a raft, and they fell to the bottom of the ocean. Well, it didn't matter. They didn't have to go down there and get it, because everybody in the tribe, in the community, knew what it represented and knew that it was there. Well, that's the same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin exists in a giant public ledger in the cloud. So no one actually sends or receives Bitcoin. It's not like I have it and I have to send it to you. That's just an analogy to get people to understand it. What's really taking place in the public ledger in the cloud is a transfer of ownership from one person to another. And the way that cloud is secured is the breakthrough technology for Bitcoin, because it allows it to happen in a decentralized way without a third party. Now, we all know what SETI is. This, as of last year, was the largest distributed computing project in the world. The dormant computer cycles at universities would be used to search for radio signals. The purple represents the part of the galaxy that's been scanned. In the middle of last year, the Bitcoin distributed computing network surpassed the SETI project in terms of computational power. And this growth curve, which is measured in terahashes per second, is what secures the Bitcoin blockchain around the world. This hashing power is not only has it far surpassed SETI in terms of distributed computing power, it is also stronger than the top 500 supercomputers combined. So what happens when trust is decentralized? Decentralized trust essentially means that you don't have a third-party intermediary. I'm going to show you a very brief video that I found to be really helpful in explaining Bitcoin, and after that I'll discuss it a little bit more.
What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the first decentralized digital currency. Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net, without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower, you can use them in every country, your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits. Let's look at how it works. Bitcoins are generated all over the internet by anybody running a free application called a Bitcoin miner. Mining requires a certain amount of work for each block of coins. This amount is automatically adjusted by the network such that Bitcoins are always created at a predictable and limited rate. Your Bitcoins are stored in your digital wallet, which might look familiar if you use online banking. When you transfer Bitcoins, an electronic signature is added. After a few minutes, the transaction is verified by a miner and permanently and anonymously stored in the network. The Bitcoin software is completely open source and anybody can review the code. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. When everyone has access to a global market, great ideas flourish. Let's look at some examples of how Bitcoins are already used today. You can purchase video games, gifts, books, servers, and alpaca socks. Several currency exchanges exist where you can trade your Bitcoins for dollars, euros, and more. Bitcoins are a great way for small businesses and freelancers to get noticed. It doesn't cost anything to start accepting them, there are no chargebacks or fees, and you'll get additional business from the Bitcoin economy. For your first Bitcoins and more information, visit weusecoins.com.
Okay, so by the way, that video was produced in Switzerland with donations of 5,000 Bitcoin, which right now would be about $2.5 million US if they had kept the Bitcoin. You can see that without an intermediary, Bitcoin becomes extremely disruptive. And I call it disruption within disruption. I go to a lot of payments conferences, and they're always talking about disruption by adding squares or dongles or different ways to move money over Visa. That's not very disruptive. Supreme disruption occurs when you introduce a new monetary unit, and you say that you don't need to use dollars or pounds or euros, because it allows you to take advantage of things that the legacy players wouldn't be able to take advantage of. Now, one thing the video did not explain is the difference between the capital B Bitcoin and the small b Bitcoin. So I'll take a moment here to explain that. The distributed network is referred to as Bitcoin with a capital B. So that would be the equivalent of the Visa network or the PayPal network, except it's not centralized. It's distributed among the nodes of the network around the world. The small b is inseparable from the larger network because it represents the unit of value that rides on that network, and it's also the reward that the miners receive for doing that work and securing the blockchain. It turns out that mining Bitcoins is a lot more profitable than searching for aliens in outer space. And that reward is what provides the incentive to do that. With Bitcoin, you spark currency competition with national issuers. This is something that we run into quite a bit because we spend a lot of time testifying or doing educational seminars with various regulators. And they're not up to speed yet on why Bitcoin replaces their unit. They're still stuck in the mentality of Bitcoin is some type of a payment system, so banks have to worry. I think that the central bankers have far more to worry about than the commercial banks. All right, I want to go over some of the Bitcoin benefits to consumers. Why would you want to use Bitcoin as a consumer? I want to bring up analog equivalent rights. This is a notion that's been advanced by Rick Falkving with the Swedish Pirate Party. And what he says is that when you move online, you shouldn't give up the rights that you have in the current world. And with cash like this that we all use in our daily life, we have a certain amount of existing privacy. And we shouldn't give that up and trade that for going online. Specifically, when you use paper cash, you have these three properties. You have anonymity, untraceability, and irreversibility. We've had those features with paper money for a long time already. And with electronic cash, it really just tends to mean privacy, the fact that your transactions are personal. If you want to make a personal transaction and you don't want to reveal to the world what you bought. And then, obviously, irreversibility refers to payment finality. Once you give someone Bitcoin, it's like a digital bearer certificate. They have it, and you no longer have it. So it's not reversible. So what about the merchant side? What do the merchants see as a benefit for Bitcoin? Well, you can extend acceptance to countries 60 plus that aren't even reached by Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal. They block out a large part of the world. And unfortunately, it's a large part of the developing world, the people who need these services the most to enter the international global economy. Bitcoin removes that and gives the ability for citizens in those countries to join the global economy. So in effect, you're providing a payment method for the unbanked. There's no disallowed merchant category codes. In the Visa, MasterCard world, they will block your business if you don't fit into a particular paradigm for what that nation wants to see in terms of merchants. The obvious example is gambling in certain countries are blocked. Not subject to payments embargo. This was a very famous episode that we saw with WikiLeaks. When WikiLeaks was accepting donations over the internet, and the United States government said, they convinced Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal to stop accepting donations. So WikiLeaks in one day was basically cut off at the throat from their funding source. They went to Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, since it's point-to-point, was able to continue the funding. So very important in terms of bypassing payments embargo. You eliminate chargeback and fraud risk, which is very costly for a large category of merchants. They don't like selling things if the buyer can issue a chargeback and then get the product and their money. Since Bitcoin is like cash on the internet, it's an irreversible transaction. You have processing fees approaching zero, and you have near immediacy of settlement. This, again, is very important when you compare it to a typical payments environment. In a payments environment, like the hotel that we all checked into here, you'll put a hold on your card with an authorization, then there will be clearing, and then the hotel 5 days later will probably get compensated through a settlement to their bank. With Bitcoin, the authorization, clearing, and settlement are all compressed into a single point in time. So very beneficial for merchants, and if you trust your merchant, then you would be able to to negotiate phased payments of that. Okay, this right here is what Bitcoin mining machines look like. These are mining rigs. I call it decentral banking of the future because if we're replacing the central bank currency, this is what's going to secure the network and the transactions. The one on the left here is a group of ASIC miners, which are specialized application-specific integrated circuits. They're custom made to only do Bitcoin mining. The one on the right, it looks like it's an older GPU mining rig, and it's in his basement apparently because it throws off a lot of heat, so he's probably using it to heat his house. All of those computer rigs are distributed around the world, and this site right here is one that the foundation sponsors, and it measures the health of the network around the world. This snapshot, I think, was from February when the US and Russia were number one and two in terms of active nodes worldwide. It's interesting that Netherlands is on here as number 7. Netherlands is not number 7 in population, but they have a very active Bitcoin mining community. You sometimes see these numbers shift around. Ukraine will pop up as number 10. Whenever there's certain strife in the world, it seems like Bitcoin mining gets more active in that part of the world. The point is, we don't need kings to coin our money. They used to do that, but now with a decentralized trust ledger, we can coin our own money. And that brings us to a post-legal tender era. And this is how Bitcoin will change your life. Because we've all grown up in the legal tender era, where you stamp currency, which is paper, as fiat, legal tender, good for the payment of taxes. But it doesn't really have any intrinsic value. It's a mass illusion. Many things are going to change when we go to the post-legal tender era. I'm going to point out a few here because the absence of financial intermediaries transforms current industries. The first industry that will be transformed is retail payments. We're already seeing this today with retail payments going mobile. So when you go to a mobile payments conference, they're still trying to figure this out. They're still trying to figure out how you can make money off of being in the middle of the transaction. Behind their backs, though, these transactions are already occurring in a point-to-point environment from consumer to merchant without any intermediary. Bitcoin has several mobile apps that you can download, wallets that allow you to send and receive. Unfortunately, the Apple iOS is blocking them right now, so you have to have an Android at the moment. Apple says it's because of legal reasons, but we all know that it's because Apple has their own payments brand that they want to launch, and they don't want to give anybody else in the network a leg up inside the Apple walled garden. The next industry that's going to be disrupted is the interbank transfers. This is run by SWIFT, largely. And sometimes countries want to get off of SWIFT, but they have nowhere else to go. This Bitcoin, as it matures, will allow nation-to-nation payments, and it will allow business-to-business payments that don't use services like Western Union and SWIFT. So fundamentally altering the financial transfer landscape. And then lastly, asset management becomes personal. What do I mean by that? Well, just in time for the end of Swiss banking and the end of financial privacy, Bitcoin allows you to be in charge of your own wealth. And you can store it on a paper wallet, you can store it on a USB stick, or you can even store it in your brain, which is known as a brain wallet. It's a special way that you can derive your private key from a phrase from Shakespeare. I wouldn't recommend the Shakespeare phrase, though, because that one could easily be hacked. So you can see in the financial area alone, there's going to be significant changes from Bitcoin. This has governments very fearful. So their immediate reaction is to issue a statement to ban it. You see a lot of these. We see almost one a day Vietnam bans Bitcoin. Russia banned Bitcoin last month, and they didn't just say they were banning Bitcoin, they said it was always banned, even going back 5 years ago. So the reasons that they're scared about it, even though they won't admit it, is because it impacts monetary and fiscal policy. And specifically on the monetary policy side, you have dramatic changes. On the fiscal policy side, you will have dramatic changes. But underlying all of it is the fact that Bitcoin will outlive political institutions. You will have certain countries come and go, but Bitcoin, even though only approximately half of the Bitcoin have been issued so far, it will still continue to be issuing until the year 2140. And nothing's going to change that on the current network. It won't be stopped by decree. So I don't think you'll have all of the same political countries in 2140 that we have now. So let's look at the monetary policy in the post-legal tender era, because these are the most substantial and significant impacts that we're going to see from a monetary unit that is delinked from central issuance. We will have no fractional issuance. So printing funny money at will not be managed by the sovereign. We'll have healthy deflation. People have made deflation a bad word, but deflation is really increasing your purchasing power. We see deflation in computer products and mobile phones. We should see that across a broader spectrum of commodities. So we won't see the unrestrained inflation that we see now from the Federal Reserve and the ECB. And we'll see a reduction in detrimental business cycles. Interest rates will respond more to lending activity, which is what they really should be responding to, rather than central bank open market operations on manipulating and controlling the interest rates. So very big economic implications for something like Bitcoin. On the fiscal policy side, it gets even more interesting because it will have the effect of de-emphasizing the income tax. Governments, when they're unable to ascertain what true income is, taxes won't go away. They're just going to change form. And we'll start to see governments relying more on consumption-based taxes, which are easier to enforce and regulate, than income-based taxes. So don't have this dream in your head that taxes are going to magically go away. It'll be the properties of Bitcoin that start to change the taxation environment. And the endpoint regulation is what we're seeing now. We're seeing regulation around the point of conversion from regular currencies, fiat currencies, in and out of Bitcoin. That's the only thing that they can actually control on the Bitcoin network, because the rest of it that I showed you is completely distributed. They would have to turn off the internet worldwide and go into all those homes and garages that are securing the network if they wanted to end Bitcoin. So Bitcoin comes with pre-existing survivability. And that's a result of what the Bitcoin author saw in the electronic currency movements of the 80s and 90s. So since merchants can be regulated more, that will also drive the shift towards more consumption-based taxes. And then a check on spending. This is one of the most important changes that we'll see in fiscal policy as a result of Bitcoin becoming mainstream. I'm not going to tell you which country it is, but there's a certain country that conducts its wars through printing money. And they don't have to actually go to the population and call for a direct vote on whether or not, a direct tax on whether or not they should fund something. They just do it, and then they print the money to cover it up. They print the money to finance it. When you have to actually have a valid check on government spending, you won't see crazy spending as a result of that goes against what the nation's people want, because it will have to be voted for. And Bitcoin allows that because it's taken that power away from the central bank. In 2009, Bitcoin was largely hoarded and invested. It was invested in almost as a speculative media because you didn't have a lot of merchants that were accepting it in trade. So what we've seen between 2009 and 2013 is we've seen that the Bitcoins are actually starting to be turned over more. So increased velocity in Bitcoin. This is very encouraging, and it shows that people are actually spending them now and not holding on to them, which is growing the economy. What would be even better is if we saw them stay in Bitcoin and not be converted in and out of national currencies. Okay, as a result of all this, I want to point out the Bitcoin cultural impact on media. This was, by the way, there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers study on media and Bitcoin. So I encourage you to download that. These are some of the things that Bitcoin will impact in the media industry. And we're already starting to see it with crowdfunding. People are much more likely to fund something if they can do it in under 1 minute without going through credit cards. So it's a very easy form of payment. The same with charitable causes. Bitcoin community is very charitable. There's over 100 Bitcoin charities that have raised money this way. So again, very successful. It's also helpful if you want to track where your money's going. Your charitable donations are not just going into a black hole. Because you can see them and view them on the public ledger, you can actually hold your charity accountable. Obviously, microtransactions. People here at the conference have talked about the paywalls and pay per content, where you can get below 1 cent. Bitcoin can go to 0.00008 zeros, 7 zeros, and a 1 to accommodate that growth. So you can have a lot of small transactions without a lot of processing costs. The PricewaterhouseCoopers study also pointed out the in-app purchases and gaming. Gaming is very popular with Bitcoin right now, both the gambling variety and the regular gaming variety. You can also be prompted in the middle of an app experience to make a purchase. And on the branding side, with free publicity, we've seen companies like Overstock.com take advantage of the fact that their competition is not accepting Bitcoin. So they were in the news because they accepted Bitcoin. I mean, how many times has a brand been able to just get free publicity by changing a payment method? That's been remarkable to see. And we have the CEO from Overstock is speaking at the Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam to describe his experience there. We see Tiger Direct doing it. We even saw the most famous is Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic. You can buy a trip to space for $250,000 worth of Bitcoin, and he already has 8 seats filled. So Bitcoin people want to go into space. He got a lot of publicity from just accepting Bitcoin. So there's opportunities now for brands just from the payment method to exploit that. I don't think that opportunity will last very long because it's only to the first movers. The largest transaction that ever occurred on the Bitcoin network was $159 million. And it was an international transaction. We don't know who sent it, we don't know who received it, and we don't even know the countries that were involved, but we do know that they only paid $8 in transaction fees, which would definitely not happen if they did that on Swift. At the time that transaction was occurring, Bitcoin on this graph was bumped up to be above Discover and knocking on the door of American Express. It was a result of that one single transaction, so obviously it wasn't sustainable because this is average daily transaction volume. So now Bitcoin consistently sits at about 300 million above Western Union and then knocking on the door of PayPal. The world becomes a very, very different place when a Bitcoin network starts advancing up this chart and starts knocking on the door of American Express, MasterCard, and Visa. And this is in 5 short years. So it kind of blows your mind to think about what could happen when these established brands are challenged by something that's decentralized, like Bitcoin. I was also in Switzerland, in Zurich, where the ISO headquarters is. ISO is the standards body that maintains the 3-digit currency codes, the EUR, USD, GBP. It's not a government body that controls those codes. It's simply a nonprofit, standards-based organization. So I was there lobbying to get Bitcoin put in as XBT. The reason it had to be XBT, or start with X, is because their codes, the first letter represents a country. So if it was going to be something B, it would be like we'd be stepping on the toes of Bhutan or Bangladesh. So X is reserved for non-political units of account, and if Bitcoin was adopted, it would sit alongside of gold and silver. Gold is XAU, and silver is XAG. So that's an appropriate spot for Bitcoin, because it really is a digital commodity. It's referred to as digital gold. I referred to gold as analog Bitcoin. When Bitcoin achieves the status of having a 3-digit code, then it can automatically be integrated into the payment networks as XBT, because the ISO standards are what Visa, PayPal, MasterCard, and SWIFT, and all of those guys tend to use. It would be integrated into the trading platforms. We're also seeing foreign exchange sites start to quote the price of Bitcoin. So if any of you have those apps, Oanda or XE, they quote the price of Bitcoin now as XBT, even though it's still pending. So this is all a very bright future for Bitcoin, undoubtedly. I mean, I would love to see Bitcoin get into some of these trading systems, especially the Reuters dealing system, because it would allow hedging. It would allow people to manage their Bitcoin inventory, which would, in effect, start to grow the commerce around it. But you don't have to take my word for it, because these are some quotes from the establishment. They've looked at Bitcoin, and this is what Bill Gates had to say about Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is a technical tour de force. Al Gore said that he thinks the fact that within the Bitcoin universe, an algorithm replaces the functions of the government is actually pretty cool. Well, I mean, that's probably one of the only things that I've ever agreed with Al Gore on, but there it is right there. And then Nassim Taleb, who's the author of the Black Swan, he said Bitcoin is the beginning of something great, a currency without a government, something necessary and imperative. Well, I can't leave you today without my quote, which is, Bitcoin is to legal tender as BitTorrents are to copyrights. And we all know what happened to copyrights. So thank you for your time.
So do you pay yourself in Bitcoin?
Everybody at the foundation is compensated in Bitcoin. We have to eat our own dog food.
So your monthly annual salary is entirely now paid through the Bitcoin wallet?
Through the Bitcoin networks, correct.
Wow. And how's your life these days?
Well, it's better when it's going up, but it's structured in a way that we're allowed to sell a certain. We can sell at a time where it allows employees to pay their bills. So every employee makes the decision of how much they want to keep versus how much they need to sell for regular expenses. Okay.
How do you respond to the challenges at the moment with the Bitcoin exchanges? Because, I mean, there's a huge issue here with transparency. The Mt. Gox scandal, where it looked like about $400 million worth of Bitcoin simply vanished. How do you resolve those issues? I mean, surely that's possibly something that is very, very detrimental to the brand.
Absolutely. With the Mt. Gox situation and other exchanges, the customers were tending to use those exchanges as banks. They were keeping inordinate amounts of Bitcoin on balance there, which is completely unnecessary, and they should not have been treating them as banks. The industry and the ecosystem is moving towards best practices. There's cryptographic ways now to verify assets that are held on account. But I think the most instructive lesson that came out of the Mt. Gox episode is that it showed us and it represented the exact opposite of too big to fail capitalism. If Mt. Gox or any other exchange were a traditional financial institution, it would have been bailed out. It would have been bailed out by the taxpayers. So we should be glad that it is the opposite of too big to fail capitalism, and they should not have been bailed out.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions to the Executive Director of Bitcoin? Okay, we have, look at this. Look how efficient we are. Your name and your company first, please.
My name is Inma. My company is Swoop Media. I used to be a trader at Goldman Sachs for my sins when I was 24. You're coming to fight in the playground against some huge bullies. And they gave you a little beating at Davos saying that Bitcoin is going to be, the panacea for the money laundering and the terrorists. My first question is, how do you come back against accusations like that or potential dangers like that? And my second point is, who is your user? You are a brand that is going to convince consumers to work with you. And when I saw the presentation, I'm pretty smart cookie, but it's so difficult. Mining, robots. How are you going to create a consumer brand?
Right, let me start with the prior question. The amount of money laundering that is done through the dollar and the euro dwarfs small little Bitcoin. So I don't think that we're anywhere near there at this point. And they always roll it out as one of the 4 horsemen of the info clips. So I also want to point out that the highest concentration of 500 euro notes is actually in South America. So, and that's the same with the 1,000 Swiss franc note as well. So that's where the money laundering occurs. On the branding side, I represent a nonprofit foundation. So similar to the Linux Foundation, when Linux came out and was competing against Microsoft and Microsoft OS, it needed to have a body that would standardize the code, promote the protocol, protect the protocol. So those are the same things that we do with Bitcoin. The main function for setting up the foundation was to compensate the developers that were working on a volunteer basis. And we wanted transparent compensation, so we knew where they were getting paid from.
Okay. Thank you. We have one final question. I'm sorry. I saw this gentleman first. I apologize to the chap at the back.
This is Emmanuel from Omnicom Media Group. You were saying that one of the good advantages for media as for consumers is maybe about charity or more transparent, more easy transactions. But what is the real advantage for people when it is easy to have hidden and not trackable transaction in the black market? You are not there is no chance to individuate people who is buying pornography, weapons, drugs.
Okay. So the lack of traceability is, you say it's democracy in action, but actually it does have a lot of issues.
Well, first of all, you have to remember currency doesn't have a morality. Okay, currency doesn't do bad things. People do bad things. And it's possible in any medium of exchange. I think what Bitcoin opens up is financial privacy, which should be a natural inherent right. And it's user-defined financial privacy. So you have your own individual sliding scale. If you want to be completely transparent, like some of the people that I talked to from Sweden want to be, they can be completely transparent and they can link their Bitcoin address to their personal identity. If you don't want to be transparent and you want to be on the other side of that spectrum in terms of privacy, the choice is yours. And I think that that's the important point, is that it's your choice on where you set yourself on that privacy scale. And that's the thing that we shouldn't lose track of.
Thank you, John. I know there's more questions coming from the floor. You will have your chance. But thank you for a fascinating insight into your world. Ladies and gentlemen, Jon Matonis from Bitcoin.